Okay, so I'm going to get us going. Welcome to this panel discussing climate change on the international platform. Our climate forum brings a discussion together across international boundaries with businesses who share a common interest in seeing how this important area for everyone evolves moving forward. Globally, there's a diverse and innovative culture of small and medium-sized businesses with a greater awareness than ever in the importance and urgency of the climate emergency. At the same time, governments around the world are ratcheting up climate-based legislation and low-carbon procurement policies are increasingly affecting SMEs. So we're looking forward today to an engaging discussion as we look beyond the COVID pandemic and prepare for the future, for business with the climate emergency becoming a #1 priority. On the panel today, we have Hayden. Oh, I should introduce myself before I introduce the panel, shouldn't I? Let's do that. I'm Ian McQuone, founder of Go Climate Positive, a membership program aiming to make it easier for SMEs to understand and reduce their carbon footprint, and I'm based in Gloucestershire in the UK. We have with us Hayden Milton-Green of Synergy GRC Consulting and Greenmont Farming. Hayden, very interesting perspective today because he has two professions, regenerative farming and environmental, social and governance consulting. He's passionate about inclusive socio-economic development, as well as understanding and mitigating the impacts of climate change. Hayden has been involved in livestock, macadamia nut and tea tree farming, and is a member of the New England Farmers Association, Paddock Farmers Association and the Macadamia Association. Who knew? He offers integrated strategy management and reporting consulting advisory services across a number of primary sectors too. He joins us from the Twin Streams estate in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Welcome, Hayden. We also have Andrew Mackenzie from Tivoli Consulting and the Growth Hub in Gloucestershire. Andrew is a specialist guide at the Gloucestershire Growth Hub, supporting the county's SMEs to understand what net zero potentially means to their organisation and advising how they can take positive steps to embed sustainable, purpose-driven practices to address the challenges and opportunities related to climate change. Andrew is also an independent sustainability consultant working with clients throughout the UK, and he's also in Gloucestershire. We also have John Harris with us from the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport International. So John brings his 30+ years of experience of transport and town planning to the table. He's an international lead for education, training, professional development of the CITL, which is a professional body for everyone who works in supply chain, logistics and transport. Also a co-director of the Gloucestershire Community Rail Partnership. And I'm not quite sure where you are today, John. Would you like to enlighten us?
I'm in London.
You're in London.
I'm in London.
There we go.
Sorry about the bright light behind.
It looks like you're trying to interrogate us, but
yes,
that might be the other way around. We also have Neil Williams, from who's a principal consultant at Tillix, currently on a train in Sweden, but hopefully shortly to get into the office. So, Tillix are agents of change in energy, clean tech and mobility. They offer a range of marketing and innovation services that are helping to improve the environment and abate climate change. And then finally, we have John Henry Looney from Sustainable Direction. John Henry is the Managing Director of Sustainable Direction. He works with an array of clients to help understand their issues and define solutions that can be clearly implemented. Recent projects include monitoring of life cycle material and energy usage in the dairy, leading an effluent pollution prevention and treatment program for a cider maker, and multiple projects working to embed CSR and sustainability culture in organisations. He's also a visiting professor in sustainable energy systems and techniques at the University of Lincoln. And I'm guessing you're joining us from Lincolnshire, John Henry, is that right? Spot on. Wonderful. So, now we know who we've got talking. Just mention a few ground rules. So this is a panel discussion, so I'd ask audience members to stay on mute, please, unless asked otherwise. That said, if you have questions, please do type them in the chat and we will do our best to respond to those. This session is due to last an hour, so I'm sure we're all busy, so we'll try to make sure we wrap up by 5 o'clock. We are recording, so bear that in mind. But we will I'll lead off with some questions in a moment, but a John Henry suggestion. I'm going to ask the participants a question, so get yourself prepared for that. And the question is, have you calculated your carbon footprint? And what are you, I know you're doing anything, what are you doing to reduce it? So is anybody, in fact, what I'll do is I will let you think about that, and I'll perhaps come back to that question shortly, to give you a chance to have a think about it rather than put you right on the spot. So let's get stuck in. So, but actually, as we get to each of the panel members, maybe you'd like to respond to that as well. I think it'd be interesting. So, the first question is, obviously last year was the news was very much dominated by COP26 towards the back end of the year. I'm interested from your perspective how things changed in and around and since COP26, and how do you think that's going to affect smaller businesses in particular? And I'm going to kick off with John Henry, please.
Right, thank you. I'll just go for a few minutes. My carbon footprint varies between 2 and 3 tons, except I went to Texas to visit our son in November, and that kind of blew it out of the water, really. But the other than that, I drive an electric car and a hybrid, depending on where I'm going, and I've converted my house to be very energy efficient. Andrew has seen the one I did in Gloucestershire, which was negative because of the amount of energy consumption and the solar on the roof. We managed to get it to where with buying electricity was very low. So answering your question though, since COP26 could have delivered a lot for the UK, but only delivered, I would suggest, some refocusing. But what's happened more interestingly since, and probably in the last couple of months, is people are realizing that we need a transition and that we can't just turn off where we are now and get to the new future tomorrow. And it's going to take a while. It's going to take a huge amount of coordinated effort amongst a range of people. And I think this awareness is very healthy, and it's really good to see. So a professor, Fiona Charnley, who works at Exeter on circular economy, has published some really interesting data. Just to convert all the UK ICE cars to battery would take, for several of the metals, twice the global production per year, and over 75% of the lithium just to do the UK. That's not going to happen tomorrow. And I've made a number of frustrating trips around the UK in my electric car, and the charging system is, well, diabolical, basically, is one way to put it. So I think the main issues we've seen is the government's trying to refocus on what it's going to do, and the transition engineering thing is becoming more apparent as to, we're going to work at this for a while. Some things can be done very quickly. The early wins have been to some extent realized, and as we continue to roll out the wind turbines offshore, that's going to continue to help. But we've just gone through 4 or 5 months of much lower than average wind speed. So I think what's happened since COP26 is people become aware of the magnitude of the requirement.
Yeah, thank you. That transition piece is very interesting. I work with, obviously, a lot of small businesses, and there's a bit of a tendency from say, okay, what can we do to get this to zero then, and expecting to get there in a couple of years, and and then when they understand that a full scope 3 audit includes all of their supply chain, they suddenly realize, hold on, I haven't got control over this. And so of course it has to be a collaborative effort. So that's always an interesting discussion. So yeah, I'll come down to you on that, because I know you work with a lot of businesses too. What's your perspective on that? Cool.
Sorry, I lost you then. My screen went to a different place. So I think to reiterate what you've just touched on there, that actually the conversations that I'm having with Gloucestershire's SMEs is very much that off the back of COP26, there's a heightened awareness of wanting to do something, and an aspiration and an ambition to do something, including quantifying what the carbon footprint is of their activities. And a lot of the conversations are actually really early doors, that organizations recognize that they can do their supply chain and should be looking at their supply chain, but actually that they just want to get their own house in order to start with, and are feeling slightly overwhelmed by what they perceive as the intensity of doing their own house. So a lot of the conversations are about demystifying how the scope 1 and 2 piece is relatively straightforward to get their head around, really quite easy and straightforward. And not to panic about scope 3, but to at least start having the conversation with suppliers and start trying to just map out what scope 3 might look like for their organization. And celebrating making a start is a brilliant place to be. There's not an expectation that everyone will have all the answers and be able to be net zero by next week, but actually by acknowledging that there's accountability and doing something to address that's a really good place to be at, and that we shouldn't be beating ourselves up, but actually just really making sure that we start to make inroads to understanding what's going on and making a positive impact, making positive changes, which no doubt is where some of the conversation over the next 50 minutes or so will now go. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna put you on the spot now because you had time to think about it. What's your response to John Henry's challenge?
So I've not measured mine in a little while, so I couldn't tell you the absolute number. I know that over the last 2 years, it's absolutely dropped to the floor, like most of us. So any number that I did have to hand would not be truly representative. But in terms of changes that we have made, likewise, I have EV in the house as the daily driver, but actually active travel is a big piece of where we try to get to as a household. Our meat consumption is very low. It's certainly not a dominant part of a diet, and won't surprise you, utilities are sourced from renewable pieces as well. The one big bad boy that I have in the house is inherited from the previous owner, which is an Aga in the kitchen, which chews through gas at quite some rate, and it's an interesting piece about premature replacement of technology. John, it's there, it works, it's a heat source. Is it a good thing to take it out when there's something that's perfectly good and working? And so there's a narrative to work through there about swapping things out if there's still a useful life in there, versus swapping something out early in favor of something that is a lower emission consumer. It's
interesting. Yes, thank you. So great. So we've heard two voices from the UK. I'm very intrigued to hear maybe get a voice from a different country entirely. So Hayden, I'm going to come to you. So I'm really interested to know what kind of the perspective on COP26 was in South Africa. And I think also just building on, we've heard a couple of thoughts around kind of the internal reasons that companies have decided they want to do something. I'm also very interested to explore, are there starting to get external pressures for businesses to do something, whether or not they choose to?
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so my carbon footprint is quite heavy. So it hovers between 7 and 8 for my farming enterprises. It's mainly scope 1. Scope 2 is reasonably okay, but I'm proving now that I'm offsetting it all with regenerative agriculture. So my agriculture, but it's unproven. So I'm in process of proving that and entering the carbon sequestration program. That's my farming hat on. So I'll take that one off and I'll put my consulting hat on. South Africa, we obviously released a NDC just before COP26, where we put through our targets. But personally, the elephant in the room wasn't addressed, which is our scope 2, or as a country, is our electricity generation as consumers, because that has grid emission factor of 1.04. So we're doing terribly from a renewable energy perspective, and it's really impacting us. But unfortunately, our renewable energy program was derailed a few years ago, but it's back on track, and I think we should be able to get our carbon grid emission factor for our electricity down to 0.95 in the next 3 years, hopefully. So what impact does that have on business? We obviously got a carbon tax bill, or carbon, which came from the climate change bill. And unfortunately, that is only looking at parts of our scope 2. So as a business, is it a big deterrent? At the moment, no, but it is certainly getting the taxation system into place that came into play last financial year, that businesses are starting to pay a small, compared to their total footprint of from a carbon tax perspective. But what is driving change, and I get excited about this, is ESG, environment, social governance, view from listed entities and from your investors. So that is driving change. So from a legislation perspective, we're not doing well. From a country perspective, we're not doing well. We've made some commitments, 2030 commitments, but they're off to reduce from our previous commitments, our 2015 commitments. But the biggest change is coming from business from two perspectives. One is energy security. So we have rolling, the correct term is rolling, I won't say rolling blackouts. It's where our electricity goes on and off on a regular basis due to supply issues. So people are moving to individuals, SMEs, small companies and larger businesses are moving very quickly to renewable energy. One is mainly for energy security, but it does have a bonus by reducing their carbon footprint. So doing the right thing is the good thing financially for South African business.
So when you say you're moving to a renewable, is that small scale? They're actually fitting their own solar panels, wind turbines and so on?
Yes, so there was a legislative glass ceiling that you could at up to 10 megawatts, and now that has quite recently, end of last year, moved up to 100 megawatts. So it's small scale as in household, but up to now your mining organization, your big businesses are rapidly moving towards producing their own embedded generation, or wheeling in generation or generated elsewhere and bringing it in with an additional cost. But it's happening, and it's happening very quickly. So, is it the tail wagging the dog? In this case, I think it's great that business and private individuals are taking the initiative. It's not good why it's happening, but it is happening, and it's happening quicker than what government can legislate.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you. So, Neil, whereabouts have you managed to get back to the office yet?
Yes.
Splendid. Good to hear. So, yeah, give us your perspective on this.
Regards footprint, it's about 2 tons. Personally, me and my family have quite a low footprint. Drive an electric car. We're in a very well insulated Swedish building. We have air source heat pump, electric heating. The two big opportunities for us as a family, I think, are around wasted food and solar power. The wasted food, I think, is a habit that as a family we can improve. The solar power is it's economically more difficult for households in Sweden, because there isn't as good subsidies as we've seen in other countries, and it's really quite a complicated system. That's my view on Sweden generally. Regards COP26, I think and this is how the media works, and this is the modern world. The big story coming out of Sweden around COP26 was is she or isn't she? Meaning, you know, is Greta going to appear or not? I didn't pick up much more in the media about Sweden and its attitudes to COP26.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. We're in this celebrity fuel age, aren't we? So even
yes,
even infiltrates into climate action. So very interesting. And what are the drivers on smaller businesses taking action in Sweden? Is it are they external, or is it all about, you know, their own internal drive at the moment?
I think small, medium businesses will have a combination of internal and external drivers in Sweden. Sweden's very good at infrastructure and doing national programs. So I think the you know, the SME economy in Sweden will generally follow the right path. I think what's interesting in Sweden is the startup culture and the innovation culture, so that there's a lot of clean tech and sustainable innovation brewing in Sweden, and they see this as an economic opportunity to export that expertise and that technology. And I think you know, it's probably not directly related to COP26, but you know, now coming out of COVID, you know, I see an increased appetite and level of activity in and around innovation and taking that to the broader world.
Okay, interesting. That actually triggers a thought in me, which is something that I've been pondering over a few weeks, and it'd be interesting to get some of your perspectives on it, which is there's a big drive been a big drive around COP26 with the race to zero to get businesses to commit to achieving net zero as an organization. And that has been very well embraced, I think, by larger organizations. Of course, net zero implies that you've currently got a large carbon footprint and you've got to drive it down. I've been trying to get my head around, what does net zero mean for a startup? I'd be interested if any of the panel have got any thoughts on that, because you're starting from zero.
Well, are you starting from zero?
Good question.
You're usually starting from a position they have no idea.
Yes, exactly.
But I guess in principle, if it's a true startup, you haven't done anything yet. So,
Very true.
So if you get it early enough, you could hope, you know, you could involve carbon perspective in your decision making.
But isn't that's the quandary? Because you are, you know, just by merely logging onto the internet and driving to work and going to the bank and begging for money, you have got a carbon footprint. So it's applicable to everyone, whether you're a startup, SME, or a large scale business. It's just, which quadrant are you in? You know, are you in we don't know what we don't know, or you're going to move into we know what we don't know? That's the key. It's either ignorance or is it knowledge? But there is no such thing as starting with nothing, because the clothes we wear, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous. So you stick up your hand, you say, I am a carbon emitter. And that's the first step. And that's where everyone thinks it's big business or smaller business or governments or utility scale, but it actually, we all have to sit around the table and look at each other and go, we all admit it.
We do, and that's right. I just the perspective I'm thinking of, even now, whilst that's true, a startup is only going to go one way, isn't it? For the first few years, it's it's going up, whereas the consensus seems to be to achieve net zero, you should be trying to make deep reductions. So, Andrew, I can see you've come off mute.
Yeah, well, I think it comes to a number of things. Partially depends on what the startup is. Do you know, if the startup in and of itself is going to replace or supersede a legacy industry, a legacy sector, a legacy something that actually drives system-wide carbon reductions, then actually beyond just its operational carbon footprint, as you wander into that scope 3 component piece of downstream impacts, what's the impact of the service offering, the proposition throughout the supply chain? Actually, if the startup's new service offering, when it's several orders of magnitude greater following huge success and investment, and that results in either initiating change elsewhere in its competitive marketplace and driving carbon down in those established businesses, or actually replaces them altogether. That's beyond just the direct operational control. There's that bigger system-wide opportunity for carbon reduction in a net zero context. I get exactly what you're saying about an absolute value, but it's where in a global economy does that carbon get captured and is accountable for? I think the other point I was going to make, though, as well, is that startups are incubators of great innovation, but are also really flexible as well. That the conversations I'm having with SMEs and startups is around how they can embed values of purpose right from the get-go. And part of that is about how do I drive down the carbon footprint of my business? How can I minimize it right from the get-go, rather than operating for 20 years and then suddenly having to go, oh, now I've got to change how I do things to meet a new paradigm. That actually there's an alignment opportunity right from the get-go to set an organization on the path that it wants to be on towards a net zero agenda.
Indeed. And as Neil was saying, where startups, a lot of startups have an opportunity is in using the net zero agenda to innovate in their products and services to help other businesses to reduce their. That can actually potentially be a much higher impact than anything they do to reduce their own operational efficiency. So, yeah. Cool. John Henry,
one of the things that Andrew and I are doing a lot of work together, and we've worked on a couple of LCAs and whole life carbon for pieces of systems. And so startups typically are doing pieces of systems, aren't they? They're not, sometimes they're trying to be a system coordinator, but they're doing a bit. And the analogy I'm using at the moment is that we're construction, working with their subbies, manufacturers, working with their suppliers, logistics firms, delivering logistics for people. We're seeing downward pressure, and people are going to be working together to kind of ratchet down the collective carbon footprint across the system. So different people's scope 3s or other people's scope 1s. And so it's a way of trying to understand. So a new startup, if they can come in and really radically change the way that they're going to do their business from a carbon and an ESG point of view, they can then enter the market in a way that will give them competitive advantage when people are going out and saying, I want to buy 6 of these or 2 of those or 4 journeys for this or whatever it might be. And I'm finding more and more people are starting to look at the embodied carbon. Mm-hmm. There was an article I mentioned, I think earlier in the press last weekend about now that we can fly again, here's 10 places you can go. And here's the description, here's the cost, but nothing about the carbon footprint. And so it's like, okay, we're now out of COVID. We're going to forget about carbon and just fly everywhere again. And it's just outrageous that in an advertisement for a holiday in X, Y, or Z, including Cape Town, that we don't get the carbon footprint, of that holiday in the advert. And so I think the startups that are that move quickly into grabbing the space of saying, well, actually, our mousetrap has a lower carbon footprint than any of the others, are going to find they're part of this ratcheting down process.
Yeah. So it's interesting that in that you say it is going to have to be a partnership and that interaction between suppliers and customers and both taking ownership there. And of course, right slap in the middle of that very often is logistics. And so I want to give John the chance to come in here, because logistics has a massive part to play in the challenge here. And so I'm interested, John, what your perspective here is.
Yeah, it's been really interesting hearing the debate so far, because there's almost a personal level of responsibility. So actually, I don't know what my carbon footprint is. I haven't tested it. I know I'm kind of doing good things, but they're probably not good enough. So I use public transport wherever I can. We've downscaled the number of cars in the household, but we still have 2, so there's still a way to go. But there's almost a macro-micro thing that's going on at the moment. And listening to what John Henry said about this ratcheting, I'm quite worried, if I'm honest, about the post-COVID UK world. I'm beginning to see what I would call carbon bleed, where carbon savings that we are patting ourselves on the back and think we're achieving, actually we're not. So let me take this example. So many people are now working at home. Many people are now not generating transport miles. They still may own a vehicle. So that is still doing something. You've still got the asset. You may decide to walk and cycle more. Yeah, absolutely. It's all good. Okay. But then when people have now adapted to very much home delivery, Amazon, just-in-time stuff, food deliveries that they had to do that way during COVID, and now, oh, isn't it convenient? Let's carry on. Whatever savings that we might be making by not being all on the road at the same time every morning, we're actually negating simply by saying, I'd much rather have it on fine, please, today, than I would just waiting until the supply chain would bring it with other stuff. So we're almost in what I call the paperclip culture now, where something that you don't really need now, or something that you just want to have to compare and then decide that you're going to buy it from somewhere else, you're actually getting all that delivered to your door. And that carbon footprint is not in, I don't think it's in the forefront of our brain. It's sort of tucked behind here, and we justify it by saying, well, the delivery van is coming our way anyway. Well, it's not. And one of the challenges here, and Hannah may well have a comment on this, is around hyper-local sustainable deliveries and how that works and what that looks like. If we scale that up to the flip side, so I'm now going to go hyper macro and answer the very first question about what is your country doing after COP. We sat down and looked at all 45 countries that CALT as a professional body operate in. We benchmarked the commitment since the Paris Agreement and what had happened or not happened against, and there's no surprise here, health and well-being, social inclusion, pollution, and the logistics index. And we looked at where the weaknesses are. And hey, everybody, where the logistics index around efficiency of the supply chain and working effectively with SMEs, where that isn't working, everyone, that's where the carbon isn't working either. So the whole issue of transport and logistics, it's a huge agenda in terms of the manufacturing of cars, trains, aeroplanes, whatever. But it's also a huge part of our daily choices. You asked a question, didn't you? Do you start as an SME with 0? Okay. So an SME that might think, I've got an electric car, I'm going to minimize, and then they decide to put their little startup business in an out-of-town industrial area because it's cheap. What they're then going to do is to prevent workforce that could use public transport accessing it. So probably they're going to get someone that drives to come and do it. They're going to not necessarily think about the green footprint of people delivering widgets and stuff into that location. And if it's near a motorway junction, hey, how's it all going to come? So actually, an entrepreneur with just one person and one employee, they can be responsible for a carbon footprint many times their own, even though they think they're a tiny business. So I do think that right from the word go, the micro business has to consider it, because unless they do, the cumulative impact of all those small businesses versus corporates that supposedly have CSR and all of that thrown up, actually the micro businesses and the small enterprises are going to be the thing that either makes it or breaks it. So there's some controversial things in there, but we've been looking as a professional body at the micro, but importantly at the big macro picture, and the fact that you cannot separate this from supply chain, procurement and other decisions.
Yeah, it's absolutely all interwoven, isn't it? So thank you. Yeah, that whole issue of carbon bleed, I think, is really critical, both at a local level, you said, and also at a national level. One of my fears is, the country might look like it's reducing its carbon footprint because our carbon footprint is most based on the emissions we create within the UK. And of course, all we're doing is exporting. As we import goods and products in from other countries, we're exporting carbon the other way, effectively. So very interesting. John Henry, did you have something you wanted to?
I don't want to cut in. I mean, we haven't heard from Hayden again or Neil, but Andrew and I've worked on a project, Innovate UK funded project, looking at last mile delivery, John, of a refrigerated food and material and a carbon reduction through a startup technology. I don't know if you want to hear about that now or later. Ian?
Okay, well, let's, as you say, let's maybe hear a couple of other perspectives, and then if we've got time, that'll be very interesting to hear about. So Hayden, yeah, obviously logistics is a very different challenge, I suspect, in South Africa, although some similarities. So what are your thoughts?
Well, you have to see it from the perspective, again, from a personal perspective, business perspective. We don't really have our public transport is limited to taxis, minivans. So obviously everyone's got a lot of affluent people, and I'm talking about, and from a poverty, above the poverty line, people have vehicles and or they take the taxi. So from that perspective, logistics is a big issue. We're a big country and we're a big continent and we're the gateway to Africa. So it's a big issue. But also from a accountability perspective, scope 3 is not that big. Scope 3 not big. It's just you scope 1 and 2 you report on, and you have to report on it as a small business to the Department of Environment, or it's called Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. But scope 3 is off the radar, and that's really worrying for us, because there's a lot of details and a lot of savings in there, and there's a lot of accountability coming back down to the sticking up my hand and saying I'm guilty. It comes back to the question you put out there is, what is net zero, and if you start up from where? Well, if they look, I'm sure most people, including myself, you look at 1 and 2, but when you start looking at scope 3, I don't know where all my products go. That is another elephant in the room, and until we get a slap on the wrist for our scope 3 footprint, including logistics, transport and logistics, we would be patting ourselves on the back when we shouldn't be. We should be working harder.
Very interesting. Thank you. Anil, you were talking about low carbon opportunities being a fantastic innovation opportunity. Are you seeing that in this area of logistics too?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Sweden has a lot of challenges around logistics. You know, it's not in the centre of Europe. It's out in the sticks, so to speak, and it's a large, vast country, not particularly densely populated. So you know, there's a lot of innovation I see in logistics. You know, ranging from last mile delivery, you know, the warehousing side of logistics, and also the electrification of logistics fleet. And I'm starting to see positive business cases for delivery trucks. You know, current fleets being converted to electric drivetrains. So the economics are starting to be positive for electrification, but there's also that question mark around, you know, is battery electric, you know, a truly sustainable approach.
Indeed. Yeah. So yes.
Ian, can I fire out a question?
You most certainly can,
if I may. So I was sat on I listened in on a webinar yesterday about electrification, decarbonisation of particularly fleets, commercial fleets, and one of the speakers was talking about the challenge in the light commercial vehicle space and electrification, and appreciate this is primarily a UK focused question, but is attributed to global supply of electrified vehicles. Are you, from your perspective, hearing and seeing real challenges associated with electrified light commercial vehicles, like those optimized final mile delivery vehicles? What does the supply chain piece look like? We hear that electric vehicles are more expensive, and then are directed to look at a total cost of ownership comparison as the true representative as to whether or not it is more expensive. Are we facing a delay in decarbonisation of that space due to high electric prices? That's main supply electric. That's also the price of electric vehicles. Are we in a perfect storm with that? What are you seeing from your side?
Was that directed at any?
Sorry, that was directed at John. I was hoping John could provide his logistics insight onto that one.
You're muted, John.
I just lost the tail end of that. Could you just repeat that? Sorry, that I had a sound issue. Just repeat, the end bit, Andrew.
Yeah, so it was just about the perfect storm that we now seem to find ourselves in the UK of soaring electricity prices and delayed or constrained supply of electric delivery vehicles, particularly the 3.5 ton segment final mile delivery space, which are also the vehicle classification that the construction sector is heavily reliant on, let's say. What are you seeing from your side of things as to the challenges that will have for your members decarbonising that part of their activity?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to be a bit controversial in my answer here. There's a personal opinion and there's probably a corporate one, and it's a bit of both. Ultimately, electric vehicles are still vehicles, and whilst we know that there's been some really good stuff done by some of the larger commercial distributors, they've got their vans zooming around doing the last mile. Yes, there's a bit of supply and demand issue around getting the fleet and getting them, you know, out there. But I think there's some more fundamental questions we need to be asking ourselves. Number one, what is the facilities management industry doing in this country to address the last meter? And this is half of the problem. I do accept that the construction sector needs those kinds of vehicles to bring in plant equipment tools. Yes, I agree, Andrew. But when we're talking about deliveries to new developments, high-rise living in urban areas, and nobody has thought about the effective storage of deliveries, that's where I start to get itchy, because we're having then, as the logistics sector, to then say, well, how do we fix this? Is it e-bike deliveries? Is it your under 3.5 tonners on EV? And yet the flip side is you're building destinations that are just not 21st century suitable for last meter delivery. So typical apartment blocks or office blocks, you want every bit of that space to be marketable for footprint. You want to have your low carbon development so that you don't have so many cars parked in the basement. Yeah, fine. But if you can't take deliveries unless the person's there, if the storeroom is just a cage rather than somewhere that can store foodstuff in a refrigerated environment, then this is then driving the the transport environment in the first place. So number one, I think there's got to be a meeting of minds around building design and facilities management around last meter and how that impacts back up. The second thing is, are we being creative enough in terms of SMEs wanting to come up with innovative delivery solutions? So we've seen prototypes of e-delivery and pedal bike last mile schemes. There are many of these popping up all over the country. There was an article in The Guardian this week about the explosion of e-bike cargo. But the fact is should we be fighting to get those off the ground? Is there not a more strategic way of looking at this in terms of sustainable transport hubs? Are we using railway stations as assets that now have lots of vacant space in them that are not particularly suitable for waiting rooms and ticket offices, but actually would be great refurbished to storage facilities? I'm not going back to the parcels bay, but I'm going back to using these kinds of locations as much more sustainable hubs in the community that would allow SMEs to operate out of them. I mean, obviously we'd like to see more EVs. Yes, there is a short-term supply, but I think a lot of this, quite frankly, is down to how brave and aggressive local planning authorities will be in permitting some creative land use activities. It will be how much investment local economic partnerships are willing to give into things like cargo bikes. Ultimately, it's down to how that destination environment is designed and whether it's really creative enough in the way it takes deliveries. Bit of a long answer, but you'll understand why I think fundamentally it's not just the job of the third-party logistics providers, your Incantons, your DPDs, your DHLs to fix this. This is to do with a systemic improvement in the way we do urban planning.
It's really, really interesting, John. I think what in a kind of a slightly broader context, you say what's really important there is to look at the whole system and not just look at individual parts. And I think with Hayden saying, there's just not enough focus on scope 3. And I think that's a wider focus on that would certainly probably help, because it forces you to work with your partners and not just say, well, I'll do my bit and everybody else can sort themselves out. As you say, you can easily make some decisions which maybe reduce your own energy use, but then suddenly increase the amount of logistics that you need, and vice versa. So a timely reminder on that. John Henry's saying I'm stating the obvious here, but
I think it is, as several people are picking up, it is a systems issue, and a coordination issue, where it's a solution. It's changing, getting people to look at things differently and think outside of their own company's windows and door, what they do. Thanks, Paula. Yeah, we were on a call, Andrew and I and Paula were on a call today with a company who's trying to figure this out in a genuine way, and they use a lot of subs. And so it's, how do you control this? How do you understand it? Not control it. How do you understand it and get other people to do their bit? I think it's going to gain momentum. I definitely it's going to gain momentum as we get into this. ESG is going to help if people don't try to commoditize it too quickly, which is there's danger of, in my opinion. So just slide down the CSG slope, but hopefully less this time. But yeah, it's interesting. A couple of people commented we need to reduce consumption. John's picked up on the white van plethora that. John, in your opinion, can I ask you a question? In your opinion, this country had a brilliant delivery system once upon a time called the milkman and the postman, right? Now we can call them milk people and post people or whatever, but these people pretty much went to every house every day. So you had 2 deliveries to your house every day. How come we haven't just leveraged that?
Okay. Without getting into a big social debate, there's a lot of stuff post-COVID that's been done about the social condition of our towns and cities in the UK and how people are beginning to feel disconnected from even the locality where they live. I'd throw this back and say, if you do a business case now, yeah, do you reinstate a postman and a milkman? Yeah, my angle would be is actually, in some instances, do we need those people to almost be loneliness agents? Is what we are now looking at is we need that kind of familiar face knocking on the door, daily person. It used to be the milkman, yeah, but now we're all kind of scratching our heads saying we've got people that have moved into new homes. They don't know anybody. Yes, they've got a lovely house, but there's been no social networks apart from walking the dog and meeting people. There's been very little else going on. So people may be wealth rich, property rich, but connections poor. And that's not about people living in poverty. That's people that may well be affluent, but they are just not connected. So I would like to see very much a join up between logistics and supply chain solutions and how we target perhaps some of the post-COVID loneliness and social challenges that our communities are seeing. And I think that's the new lens to look through this particular issue at.
Wow. What a vision. I love that. That's fantastic.
Well, in our village, the postman is known to everybody, and he would know if somebody wasn't answering the door, and he would do something. And so the social network functions with our postie. I'll call him a postie, anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does work, and it's really important. Everybody knows him, and if you have a different postman, everybody then comments, "Where's Mark today?"
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so we could spend another hour talking about that, I reckon. So I'm mindful of the fact that we are getting close towards 5 o'clock, and I'd like to offer the audience members the opportunity to ask any questions if they have, just to finish off the accountability. I have calculated the carbon footprint of my business, not actually my personal one. The business is around about 2 tons. It's pretty small. The main thing that I've done personally, I guess, to reduce it is about a year ago took the decision to get rid of my car, or not to replace my car at all. So I'm on bike and public transport, which is fun. But to be fair, I'm lucky that I operate a business model where I can use this medium of Zoom an awful lot. So not every business is obviously able to do that. So yeah, so let's open up to the floor. Has anybody got any questions? by all means come off mute to ask them.
Hiya. Yeah. So I was just wanting to ask a question. I work with John. We're directors of Gloucestershire Community Rail Partnership, but I also work for Visit Gloucestershire. And so I'm I'm fascinated by the whole sort of carbon agenda in various contexts, and rail and public transport is a big focus of my attention. And I ran a tourism business for 15 years and calculated my carbon, and it was horrific because of the journey that the tourists were coming to us in the middle of nowhere and the flights they were taking. So since coming back to England, I've focused on, giving up the car. So, and I noticed there's a lot of comments around EV and electrification of cars. And I just wanted to ask, someone said to me maybe about 4 years ago that actually this was a ridiculous notion, because actually if everyone bought an electric car tomorrow, the power that was produced there's not enough renewable power to sustain that environmentally, and it's not a good option. And I know it's a controversial one, because I'm wondering what you guys think, because this has been mentioned a fair bit, and I'm very much on the public transport for various reasons, but I just wonder what the comments were back on that point.
I'll take that one as a starter for 10. Hey, Hannah. I'm absolutely in agreement with you that actually the bigger picture is a paradigm shift, to shift away from individual vehicle ownership. That the numbers, again, UK numbers, imply that most vehicles sit for 97% of their time doing nothing. Absolutely nada, other than taking up space in our towns and cities. The amount of hard standing that is allocated in our towns to transport in a motor vehicle is disproportionate to the number of people that own a motor vehicle. And so the solution is not everybody having an electric vehicle. Absolutely, 100%. That is absolutely not the answer. A shift towards sharing economies or public transport systems that can allow more people greater access to where they want to get to, with the convenience of getting there when they want to, when they need to. That's what's the type of solution that's called for. Where Hayden's talking about taxis, actually, that's the perfect sharing model right there, actually, where there's an asset that is being used by multiple end users throughout a day, and sweating the asset for as much as it's capable of using. The Gloucestershire's trials of e-scooters to try and encourage people out of cars and onto electric scooters to move around. That shows a degree of innovation and a willingness from local authorities to try something else to get people out of individual assets. But I'll stop there. But I'm in agreement that I don't think the answer to this is an electric vehicle for a like-for-like replacement. That's not the key. It's a huge systems change. It's a paradigm shift. But the car ownership piece is interesting because of what the brand, the model says about the individual owner, and there's a decoupling of that as well that needs to go on.
Very interesting.
And if I can help out, I know you probably know what I'm going to say, but I might surprise you. Andrew's point there is much about personal mobility and how you move around for business, for leisure, etc. I'd say that the next big warning around congestion causing is one that's subconscious, and it's actually more dangerous. And I'd go back to my point about the white van culture. Because we're not physically doing anything apart from ordering from Tesco or wherever we're going to, and we're sitting down, we're not thinking about that. It's not real until it arrives at our doorstep. And I think that there is a new peak travel behaviour which is now probably 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, where everyone wants all their goods delivered for Sunday roast, and all those vans are whizzing around residential estates under time pressure, and that's the time that we should be letting our children out to play and to be able to claim back public space for them. So I see it's no longer, oh, is it taking 20 minutes to get into Gloucester City Centre, and it used to be, it used to be 15. That's not the metric I think we should be worried about. I think it's this unconscious travel behaviour where we are causing a lot of freight movement through our own just ignorance of what the level of freight movement that you're causing simply by that click of a button. I think that's something that's a key issue around safety, and that's not about the design of the vehicle, that's around the stress that the driver is under to get round and get their deliveries done. So that's just a different angle.
Thank you, John. Yeah, fascinating. That's a whole fascinating conversation to be had, I think, around how do you change mindset. And I'm mindful of the time, so unfortunately we're probably going to have to wrap it up. But just one thought occurred to me as you were talking there, which is maybe the one piece of legislation that government could do to really have the biggest impact is to mandate that every single product and service we buy has to be carbon rated, and we have to see that at the point of where we buy it. And perhaps that would start to change the mindset. So thank you, Hannah, and thank you to all my panelists. It is 2 minutes past 5, so my goodness, we had better wrap it up. As ever, we got halfway through the questions, but some really fascinating points of view, and I really appreciate everyone's time and thoughts. So that's it for today. Thanks very much, everyone.
I'd just like to just give a passing shot